Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Steger, and I am here today to talk to you. I don't know why I decided to make an intro like that. Anyways, 大家好，我叫大金鹏. So today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my childhood growing up and how that influenced and impacted me today. And I also want to preface that there's not going to be a whole lot of pictures because I wasn't someone who took a lot of pictures growing up, especially of myself. And I know my parents definitely did, so I'll be asking them for some of the pictures that you will be seeing in this video. But anyways, I wanted to talk a little bit about the two dynamics of being both an orphan and being a minority in rural America, which, for those of you who don't know, rural America tends to be very monoculturally white. And so growing up, I had a really hard time making friends and trying to fit in. I know that a lot of the things that I did as a child, I ended up doing it because I was trying to fit in, because I didn't want to stick out. I didn't continue with my Chinese language because it was something that, again, made me stick out. And when I did come to America, I was pretty fluent in Chinese, and I forced myself to only speak English to the point where I forgot and lost all of my Mandarin. And now that I'm in Chinese classes, it's been a very painful process just because it's something where I could have been bilingual, but I was stubborn and chose not to be. Piece of advice for anyone who is from a different country and they're living here in America: maintain your language because it is the key and gateway to understanding your cultures. Didn't keep up with the Chinese language, and I had a very hard time trying to fit in physically because I was different. And all of these kids, when you're a kid, you don't try and be mean. You're just very, very blunt about the things that you're asking, the things you're talking about. So when all these kids were asking me, "Hey, where are you from?" Da da da, like, you look different. You are not like the other kids. As a child, it was something where I was hyper aware of my difference, but at the same time, I was also trying to play it cool and be nonchalant about how, oh, I'm just Chinese, I'm Asian, I'm that's it. And it really wasn't until middle school when that dichotomy of race really began to play a much bigger and more integral role in my life, because when I was in sixth grade, I had in one of my history classes, my teacher was talking to me about geography. I have no clue. I kind of forget. But then she kind of asked me to go to the front of the class, and she's I know she it wasn't her intention, but she had separated me from my peers, and she asked me to write my Chinese name. Do I remember anything from my childhood? Do I speak Chinese? Da da da. Like all these other things where it's like questions that identified me as being much different from my peers, even though I didn't think of it as a big deal. But like one of my friends growing up in childhood, he was my neighbor, and he happened to be in that classroom, and he later told me that day he felt really bad for me because I was being deferred as a different person. And a few years later, her daughter and I became friends because her daughter was like 2 years younger than us, 2 or 3 years. And she told me that when the teacher had came home and told the family about it, she felt so bad for me because of the fact that I was being um, deferred as being different and stuff like that. And um, when I look back at it, I think that there are some I was definitely uncomfortable in that situation, but I was trying to play it off as, hey, it's whatever. And I think that that also goes into one of the biggest lessons that my dad has always tried to like taught me, which is I have to grow a tougher skin. Sometimes people are going to make jokes at my expense, and whether or not if the jokes are because I'm different or because of race, to be honest, and because of the fact that I'm adopted, I have to be able to control my emotions and be able to handle that, because otherwise it's going to cause a lot of discourse. And so I've always taken that to heart, but it's also made it very hard for me to understand when a joke has gone too far or when I should be standing up for myself. And a lot of the times that really made it hard for me to understand like who my friends really were and who my friends weren't. And middle school was when a lot of the more racial jokes came out, and that was also prevalent in high school. And so a lot of uh, my friends, I guess, were basically, I don't think they had malicious intent, but like sometimes they would call me the Chinese racial slur, or sometimes they'll make jokes about the fact that I am a test tube baby because I was adopted and things like that. But again, it goes into that I need to just, sometimes it's laughing it off, sometimes it's just growing a tougher skin. And I know that when I'm giving advice out there for a community, it's going to be, you can't just tell someone grow a tougher skin, like man up, and just ignore them, because that's something that's hard. You already feel isolated, you already feel more or less alone. And so for someone to give you such a uncaring and apathetic advice is um, something that you will have a hard time with. But you have to also understand that being different is not a bad thing. And there is a relationship where you want to stand out from your classmates because you want to have achieved A's, or you want to have been the best at your high school sports, whether that's soccer or being the best QB in the region. It's just an interesting dichotomy. But as for growing up and the adoption aspect, it was something where, unless if people really knew my family, they wouldn't know that I'm adopted. But when people did find out that I was adopted, there's like questions going, like people are going to be asking you questions, and that's in itself something. At first, when I'm a kid, you kind of like the attention. You kind of like the fact that people are paying attention to you and care, or I don't know if care is the right word, but they're showing you interest in who you are and your background. And it does make me feel like I am unique, but at the same time, there is that play of like also being a little bit awkward in a situation. And when you're trying to explain your childhood and people are asking you detailed questions of, can you tell me if you remember how old you were when you did this? Do you remember a lot of things from your childhood? And if so, what were you thinking about? What was going on in your head? And that's when it started becoming a blur. And when I was growing up, you'll see in most of my pictures that I will try and get, I was either by myself or with my parents, and I didn't have a lot of pictures with friends. And it was really hard to make friends. I was able to make friends, but I wasn't able to make very close friends. Most of these people were people I had a hard time building trust with, building a relationship with, either just because different family dynamics, different backgrounds, different types of relationships that they're used to. And I also understand that my idea of friendship is much more extreme than other people's, where I have a heightened sense of loyalty and I have a heightened sense of trust. But because I'm not willing to give that to just anybody, it makes it really hard for me to even make friends in the first place. Look at me. I'm wearing a black shirt now. Magic. Anyways, as I was saying before in the previous recording, I have a hard time when it comes to actually making friends even now, because despite being fairly outgoing and pretty personable and pretty like, I see myself having a hard time giving people my trust and friendship and building a relationship with complete strangers. And part of it is because I grew up very independent when I was in an orphanage. And then part of it also has to do with the fact that I grew up after being adopted in a very white area where everyone else didn't look like me. And there was as a child, I definitely didn't know, but I now can understand and identify that it felt like the cards were basically stacked against me. And that's why, as a child, I had a hard time making friends. And a lot of the times, when I was very young, I felt like everyone was my best friend, but I wasn't their best friend. And that hurt a lot, especially when you're a pre adolescent and you're trying to figure stuff out, especially in a foreign world. And so despite that, I do work on being a little bit more outgoing, being able to communicate to my close friends now, my feelings, my thoughts, and things that are in in here. And with that being said, I am very fortunate that the friends that I do have all are very attentive and they really care about me a lot, and that speaks volumes. To be clear, race should not be a defining factor of your relationships. I had to work really hard to build relationships with people from all different walks of life, whether or not they came from Chicago or they came from New Hampshire, or even building family relationships. That took time, and I was able to do that. I've taken a lot of my childhood experiences and taken it to heart in terms of trying to figure out who I am and what I am, kind of my nature and nurture dynamic within myself. And I know that growing up, middle school, high school, and even in most of college, while college I was beginning to open up more about my childhood, I also understand that in college I was not emotionally ready for that aspect of who I was. And every person in situations like mine, in any adoption, they're going to have their own right time for understanding and when they want to learn more about themselves. And there is no, oh, you know what? By the time you're in your early 20s, right after college, you're going to want to explore more about yourself. By the time you get married, da da da. Like, that's not really a thing where you can kind of observe a generalized trend, but you can make some logical conclusions where in college, after you've had more freedom for yourself, you can develop and grow as your own individual. That might increase your ego and your id, and that may bolster your desire for discovering yourself. But with that being said, I had finally chosen to discover my history and discover my past, and I'm still in that process of doing so. I had wrote an article about kind of growing up as a Asian American adoptee in rural America, and I will put that into the link in the description. And then I also wrote another article recently and just published recently about kind of the changes and the challenges that I had to push myself through in order to become more open and receptive for my own transformation and my own history and my own story. And that will also be in the link in the description. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that it has been really helpful for you. And again, if you know people who are looking for a community, who are adopted, and who are facing some adversities dealing with being a minority in America, please share the video with them, like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.